We're live to YouTube. A minute and a half to Shaw live. Seconds to Shaw. Live on Shaw.
Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to our meeting tonight. I want to thank our broadcasting and reporting partners who broadcast our meetings and report on them. Before we get going, I want to just speak briefly to the current state of COVID-19 in our community. And just want to reiterate some messaging that Algoma Public Health has. Before I do that, I want to just thank and recognize the team at Algoma Public Health and the team at the Algoma Ontario Health Team that is operating our vaccination clinic at the Memorial Gardens. I want to just recognize their great work and say to them that I've received a lot of outreach from people that have been vaccinated, who have been really impressed with the process that you've established there at the Memorial Gardens and the work you're doing and how convenient it was to get through it. So I want to thank you for that good work. I think that the local team here is doing a really good job distributing the vaccinations that we do receive, and I'm glad to see that they're doing that effectively. Algoma Public Health, along with a number of their partner public health regions in Northern Ontario, have partnered to promote a Stop the Surge messaging. We've seen a real significant increase in cases in other parts of Northern Ontario, and we have over the last week, seen some cases in Algoma and specifically Sioux Ste. Marie and Algoma that have been kind of on the increase. We've seen a half a dozen cases in the last week. One of the things that it's important to recognize is that we need to really continue to stay committed to public health advice, because it's going to take a while for us to get to a vaccination level that really keeps our community safe. Important to note that people that have only received one vaccine aren't fully vaccinated, and it takes a couple weeks for that vaccine to kick in. We have Easter weekend coming, and then we have the university year ending, so we'll have students traveling home from other parts of Ontario and other parts of the country. And we obviously have March break, which is now April break, coming up, where a lot of people will be looking for things to do. In the context of this increased risk and a significant concern over the variants, the COVID variants appear to be much more transmissible and have a much more deleterious effect, and obviously making more people ill that receive them. They want to reiterate a few messages. One is they really want you to be mindful in physical distancing and staying 2 meters apart from anybody that you do not reside with. It's not in your own household. It's important to recognize that a lot of people may carry COVID that are asymptomatic, so they don't have any symptoms. So you keep yourself safe if you keep a distance between you and anybody else that isn't in your household. Please wear a mask when you are inside. And when you're not inside and you're outside, your risk is lower, but there is still a risk there. But external outdoor activities are certainly encouraged over indoor activities. If you have any symptoms, or if anybody in your household has any symptoms, please get tested. And while you are being tested, please have everybody in the household stay home and away from other parties. And this is a really important one. Please do not engage in any non-essential travel. Avoid traveling between zones of public health unit regions, specifically regions that have higher case counts, and please discourage travel from those regions into our own region so that we could do our best to keep our community safe. So with that, please share this messaging, encourage your family and your friends to stop the surge and to follow public health advice. And hopefully we can collectively continue to work together to keep our community safe and to give our community the time it needs to be vaccinated. So Madam Clerk, once with that message shared, I'd like to start the meeting.
Under agenda item 1, a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian, resolved that the minutes of regular council meeting of March 8, 2021 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And under agenda item 3, declaration of pecuniary interest, Councillor Hilsinger has declared with respect to the 2021 Cultural Financial Assistance Grants as she's employed by the Algoma Arts Festival Association. And Councillor Hollingsworth has declared with respect to the planning matter 163 Foxford Trail and 907 Third Line East as the applicant is a client.
Okay, Council, any other conflicts that were not submitted to the clerk in advance of our meeting? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, we can move on.
Agenda item 4, a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Hollingsworth, resolved that the agenda for March 29, 2021 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Motion's carried.
And under agenda item 5.1, Autism Awareness Day.
Okay, I have a proclamation. I in a text from Councillor Bezo-Allen. Councillor, did you want to speak before or after my proclamation?
I can speak after. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, no problem. So I have a proclamation here. Whereas World Autism Awareness Day will be recognized on April 2nd, 2021 in Canada as a result of Senator Jim Munson's bill S-206, an act respecting World Autism Awareness Day. And whereas autism spectrum disorder affects more than 135,000 Ontarians, and ASD is now recognized as the most common neurological disorder, affecting 1 in every 66 children, as well as their friends, family, and community. Whereas ASD is a spectrum disorder, which means it not only manifests itself differently in every individual in whom it appears, but its characteristics will change over the life of each individual as well. A child with ASD will become an adult with ASD. Whereas Autism Ontario, formerly Autism Society Ontario, is the leading source of information referral on autism and one of the largest collective voices representing the autism community. Since 1973, Autism Ontario has been providing support, information, and opportunities for thousands of families across the province. Whereas Autism Ontario is dedicated to increasing public awareness about autism and the day-to-day issues faced by individuals with autism, their families, and the professions with whom they interact. The association and its chapter share common goals of providing information, education, support, research, and advocating for programs and services for the autism community. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 2nd, 2021 as World Autism Awareness Day in the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Councillor Bezo-Allen.
Thank you very much. I always find this proclamation very emotional from both a parent perspective and also my time involved with Children's Rehab, which is now Thrive. And the mayor himself served for many years on the board of directors at Thrive. And I just appreciate the recognition. For some of you that don't know, there's going to be a lot of changes to the Ontario Autism Program. There's going to be a lot of self-funded things that are coming down the pipe, and it's going to be very difficult for parents of young children to find services. I'm sure Councillor Gardy is fully aware of some of this himself as an educator, and I know he's pretty popular among his students on the spectrum. That's when he smiles probably the most. And I just want to say that I want to reach out and thank Don McConnell, Nancy Scott from the Accessibility Committee, as well as the Innovation Center. We've been doing lots of work behind the scenes on the municipal autism strategy, which certainly is coming at a timely period with all the changes that are coming down from the province. So I also, over 90% of our staff at G4G are adults on the spectrum. And what we've seen is pretty spectacular in terms of their confidence. We have them going on to other employment. And I just really want everyone to kind of take a pause. And I had a really proud moment today, and I'm going to get teary, but Aiden got his G1 and he's 18, and it was the second time doing it. And I never thought from the time when he spoke at council many years ago that this would happen. So he's decided that he should start in parking lots. So we're okay on the road right now because he knows he should start in parking lots. So you just never know, right? I never thought he would get his G1, and it happened. And I want all parents and adults and families out there to know that you're not alone, and your city's behind you, and you have a lot of great people behind you, and we're here. And I look forward to when we can release our municipal autism strategy. And I'm just really, I've always felt supported, and I know that a lot of people, individuals and families that are dealing with an autism spectrum disorder feel supported by this council, and I'm proud to be a part of this team. So thank you.
And thank you very much, Lisa. I saw that post today, and I thought it was a brilliant post, and you look so happy in it. I was really, it made my day. So congratulations to you, but mainly congratulations to him. So that brings us, I think, Madam Clerk, to the consent agenda. And I've had Councillor Christian ask me to pull 6.19 from consent. So we can do that, Councillor Christian's request. Before I get into the consent agenda, are there any other matters on it that council wants to pull from it? Okay, seeing none, so we'll pull 6.19. So Councillor Christian, I'm going to start with you. 6.19 is no longer on consent, so you can deal with the other matters you have, and then when we get through consent, we'll return to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some good news. I've managed to pare down my number of consent items. I think I'm down to 4, so that's good.
There you go.
Recognizing the length of our meeting, I'd like to start off with 6.11 Airport Development EDF withdrawal. And if I could direct this to Mr. Ver. I guess, Mike, I think I know the answers, but I think for public consumption, I'll ask them to, and be clear for myself. Now that the money is being withdrawn, Mr. Ver, does that money go back into the EDF fund bank, or is it kept in abeyance should the airport development group need the money in the future?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the money will return to the Community Development Fund, and so it will be available for any other projects that we receive applications for. And when the Sault Ste. Marie Airport Development Corporation come back with an ask, it will be evaluated at that time.
Thank you. And one follow-up question to that, and it relates to a question that I had for 6.5, which I've pulled. But any money that is initially earmarked, or even money that's not accounted for in a given year, does that money just sit idle in ledger, or do we actually take that money and invest it? Is that physical money, or is it just, what happens to that? Is that already invested as part of the general account? Mr. Ver?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. I think that question I will probably refer to our Chief Financial Officer, and Treasurer Shelley Shao.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. All reserves, including the EDF reserve, are included in our total bank accounts. So they would be invested with the short-term investments and as well with our banks.
Yeah. And I'll ask the question anyway, since we're on the topic. I recognize that the report in 6.5 indicates that monies invested are invested in interest-bearing vehicles. There's absolutely no flexibility in terms of by legislation, by investing in any preferred stocks or anything that's almost guaranteed money for a better return.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. No, the only way that we can invest as an individual municipality is very specific, and they have to be ranked at a certain level, and there's only certain instruments that we're allowed to invest in. There is something that's come out called the prudent investor. As a municipality, we probably wouldn't be able to invest on our own in that, but there are joint boards through an organization called One Investment, which is through one of the, I think it's AMO that has that one. At this time, it's fairly new. There's a couple of municipalities that are doing that, so I'm still evaluating whether or not it's something that we want to pursue. We do lose a bit of our own autonomy by going down that road as well.
Thank you for the answer. Mr. Mayor, that's it for 6.11.
Anybody else on 6.11? Go ahead, Councillor Christian. What's your next item?
Okay, item 6.8, through you to the city clerk. I noticed in the recommendation when it comes to travel expenses, the recommendation is that we don't indicate specifically staff and their travel. Two questions relating to that, if I could. It says that there is a safety concern by posting names, etc. What can you elaborate on that? What specifically are the safety concerns? And there was a comment that staff had a concern. Was it a group of staff? Was this just try to put some context to this for me, if you could.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. I don't want to get too deeply into security concerns, although I could say that if we identify the event that a staff member is at or a member of council is at, and there's a pattern there, that we have concerns about security for that person.
So this is a rhetorical question. I don't see the difference. What's the difference between city staff and city council? I use AMO as an example. You don't have to answer that. It's just.
I mean, that was the point of the recommendation, actually, was to say that we should not be stating either for members of council or for staff which specific events they're attending, simply that what their travel expenditure is. Okay,
fair enough. One final question. In the report, it indicated that Sudbury list employee names, etc. Have we gotten any indication from Sudbury if there's been any problems with that, with their method of reporting in terms of security and safety?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I did not reach out to them to discuss whether that had been a problem, although frankly, I was a little surprised at the level of detail. Okay, thank you. For what it's worth, I really think in the manner of transparency that we should be doing our best to get this information out, even if we don't use actual names, that we use positions, because it's taxpayer dollars, and anytime we can be transparent, I think it's important. So I won't belabor the point, but for the record, I think we should get to a point where as much detail is provided by whether it's name or position, and even if we did it yearly, just for the sake of transparency. That's it for 6.8 for me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I have a list on 6.8. So Councillor Bruni, I see your hand, Councillor Hollingsworth. I'll get to you after Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Bruni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to our city clerk, Rachel. Rachel, there's 51 purchasing cards on the report, it stated. What's the limit of these purchasing cards?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. I believe it would differ by position, but I would defer that question to the CFO.
So Michelle, did you hear the question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. It depends, as the city clerk indicated, on the position. The purchasing cards follow the same approval levels that are in our procurement policy in the bylaw. And sometimes we even put them down a little lower. So the minimum amount is actually $1,000 per transaction, and it goes up from there.
What's the highest?
I
Michelle?
don't know off the top of my head, but we don't maintain the full amount that the DCOs have as an approval limit for a single transaction limit.
Okay. Back to piggyback on Councillor Christian's question regarding the travel expenditure. Rachel, this would be listed after the travel has been completed. Am I correct? It wouldn't be put on the agenda or on the city website before the conference or the travel has occurred. It would always be after. So I'm just looking at the safety aspect of it, because city staff has concerns that if the names are published, if it was after, yeah.
Councillor Bruni, our concern was, for instance, if a certain member of council goes to the same conference every year, it's not difficult to establish what that pattern is. It was that sort of thinking that we had in mind.
Okay. So if we had so if one councillor goes to a conference every year, so the public would know that Councillor Smith attends this conference every year at this exact time, exact date, what your concern is about.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I agree with Councillor Christian regarding being transparent. I think it's very important to be transparent. If names cannot be used, then I guess city departments can be used. And I'll leave that at that. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
If I could, we're not suggesting that we don't use names. We're suggesting that we would say, for instance, Malcolm White, travel, $3,500 for the year. So we would use names, we just wouldn't identify specifically where he was.
Okay, thank you.
The employee would be identified, and the cost the employee incurred in traveling would be identified. So it would be very clear which employee was spending how much money per annum on travel. They're just not identifying exactly where that employee is going.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Shoemaker?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that preempts my question, but to be clear, to Ms. Tazinski, through you to the city clerk, Ms. Tazinski, what you're proposing to implement is what's at Schedule B, which is the City of London's example, right? It's the title of the employee, the position of the employee, and how much they spent per year as a global amount on travel or other expense.
That's correct.
I appreciate the report. As the report notes, it was one of the motions I had last term, I believe it was. I think that there is a balance here to be had between Sudbury and London. Between Sudbury and what we're currently doing. And I think the London example that we're following is a good balance. I mean, there may be further tweaking down the road, but I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. So thanks for the report, and I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Hollingsworth. Okay, I had her on my list here, but she doesn't appear to be with us right now. Councillor Gardy?
No longer necessary.
Okay, anybody else in 6.8? Nope. Okay, Councillor Christian, what's your next item?
6.13, the transit report. First of all, I have a question, but before we get there, I want to applaud staff in their continued efforts to take advantage of the Canadian Infrastructure Program. I think it's very, very important in how it relates to transit. We need to continue to support transit. I think it's very, very timely. I think the news around town, everybody's familiar with it through different avenues, that the city, at least for now, is growing. There's a lot of inward migration. I think transit will take on a bigger and bigger role as that occurs. And as we push for a smaller carbon footprint, transit is going to play a key role in that. So, and when you consider that, for every $1.2 million that we invest, we're looking at an additional 4.8. I think that's money well spent. That's good money management. My question to Mr. Lamming is pretty straightforward. In Appendix A, you list estimates for vehicles, et cetera. To be clear, and for public consumption, those prices do not include any potential savings that we could incur using our new Metrolinx joint transit procurement process. Is that correct?
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, yes, we would utilize Metrolinx to see if we could get better pricing that's stated there. For budgetary purposes, though, we did put the cost of a realistic EV unit at about 1.1 million.
And it's fair to assume then that when you're drawing your comparisons, that the comparisons would benefit, every element of the comparisons would benefit, whether it's standard diesel or electric. The cost comparatives are consistent. They just might be at lower price points.
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that's correct.
Okay, that's the only question I have on 6.13.
Councillor Shoemaker, you have questions on this report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, do we know in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, how many tons of greenhouse gas emissions are eliminated with each diesel bus that comes off the road?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Shoemaker, on average, if you take one diesel bus off the road, you're looking at reducing greenhouse gas every year, 100 tons per year.
Okay. And am I remembering correctly, was transit our largest greenhouse gas emitter as a corporation, as the city?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker, I can't say for sure that we're the largest. We're one of the largest, for sure.
Okay. So, I mean, for all the reasons Councillor Christian already touched upon, and the fact that this brings us closer to our greenhouse gas reduction targets, I definitely fully support this. Look forward to seeing some of these on the road soon.
Okay, so that brings me to Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions for Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, on page 6 of the report, it states that the annual city spend could be between 1.28 and 1.6 million, and that amount is at present not part of our tax levy. Now, if we approve this tonight, are we making a commitment, in fact, to raise that levy in the coming years, or does not approving that at budget time affect any commitments that we're making in the meantime?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Nero, on average, we've committed over the last 3 years about 1.28 million, and this plan continues that trend. Every year, as part of this 5-year plan, we'll bring back the budgetary request as part of the budget process. It's been accommodated as part of the capital allocation process in the previous 3 years. So that's how that's been treated in the past, historically.
So it's been in the budget, and we've had that money, but we're saying in the report that it's not part of the levy. I'm having a hard time understanding, is this new money that we're looking for now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor. No, I'll start answering this and then maybe put it over to our CFO. But what we've done in the past as part of our budget amount is we've allocated that amount as part of the capital allocation dollars available. What we would be looking for is, I think Michelle had suggested before, was to put part into the levy in a constant fashion. So maybe I'll let her continue from there.
Okay.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero. The only amount that is currently in the levy for capital transit costs is about $130,000 a year. As you know, over the last couple budget cycles, we have recommended that we increase the levy so that we can leverage the grants through this funding. It is very good use of funding, but at this point, we have been prioritizing transit over other capital needs and using our capital from current budget, as well as some surplus roadwork funds to manage this each year. That's not a sustainable path to go forward, though.
Okay, so we're looking to make this money available in upcoming budgets.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, yes, same as we have recommended over the last two budgets.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else on 6.13? Councilor Dufour.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this through you to Mr. Lamming. Thanks for the report, Mr. Lamming. My question is about the Appendix A 2022 to 2026 Transit ISIP plan. It outlines 4 years of investment, totals everything on the bottom, and then there's a line that says left to spend dash not utilized that totals nearly $6 million in grant money. What I'm wondering is, am I reading this that all of the items above there are included in our plan, but we actually have unspent grant room left, which if we chose to fully fund this transit plan, we would actually be able to get more done with that money?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, that's exact. So at this point, utilizing the 1.28 million per year, that would leave $5.9 million still on the table. So we would actually have to contribute as a city another $1.7 million to maximize that money, or an additional $340,000 approximately on top of the 1.28 million.
So if in the future budget year, we approved $1.6 million levy allocation for transit, that would open up another $6 million in spending room for the next 4 years for investments above and beyond what's listed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, that is correct.
Okay, that's very good for us to know, especially before we make some big decisions about our transit shelter coming up. So thank you very much, Mr. Lamming.
Okay, anybody else on 6.13? Seeing none. Councilor Christian, does that bring us to your fourth matter?
My final matter, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you. 6.17 St. Mary's River Heritage Walk. Just a comment, if you'll indulge me. I want to begin by thanking Ms. McLeod for her hard work on the committee. She's a very positive, energetic person. It's fun working with her. Also to Councillor Gardy and Councillor Shoemaker for their support. I initially brought this resolution forward to celebrate our history. I would argue that many people in the city don't fully understand what a positive history we do have. And so the idea behind this resolution was to help identify some of our historical elements, milestones, and to celebrate them. And I'll make the point I made earlier. I think the timing for this is good. We're going through a period of transition. There are a lot of newcomers coming to Sault Ste. Marie. Tourism will soon open. And so I think that this project will serve those purposes very well. Again, the project was designed to inform and to celebrate our past. And I think locals, tourists, and newcomers will appreciate it. It'll also support the waterfront and the redevelopment of Bay Street. If you read the report, that's where this Heritage Walk is proposed. So we've gotten this far down the road. I hope that when it comes to council for final budget approval, that we'll see support for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else on that matter? Councillor Bezo-Allen, you're next on my list. What's your first matter?
Sorry about that. My
No
first
problem.
is 6.14, the Pointe de Chene transit bus to the beach. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming, I had a concern from a constituent in the area concerning where the buses are going to be parking for disembarking and people getting on the bus. They had concerns due to the usually high volume of vehicles that are lining the roadway and sort of the lack of parking at the public part of the beach.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, we recognize that concern, and traditionally we were really, and when we use charters, we would go in and then turn around in the parking lot. Through this pilot right here, we'll be entering into the campground exit, which is at the most westerly part entrance, driving through the property, dropping off people as close as possible to the beach area, and then exiting out the main entrance at the day campground area at the most easterly entrance.
And it'll be probably idling, from what I could see from the schedule, about 10 or 15 minutes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my only question on that matter.
Okay, we have Councillor Scott on that matter. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to actually, I can direct this toward Mr. Lamming, but it might be better suited for Public Works, actually. Do we have those change rooms operational, or the restrooms operational out there, or were we planning to do that porta potty setup? I can't recall.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, I could start and then pass it over to my colleagues. From the last time we'd had reported back to council, the change rooms will remain open and there will be porta potties situated without the park. But I see Director Susan Hampton Beach and Deputy CEO Girardi are also available.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, yes, we will be bringing in the porta potties. They'll be in 2 locations on the site, and that's what we'll be using.
Okay, but the change rooms will still remain operational, right, for people that'll be changing?
Yes, there will be, but not the washrooms.
Okay, great. So that was one concern that I'd heard from people. Now, I do have a question about these porta potties, and I don't know how to really resolve it if it's not the case, but are they going to be accessible in any way? Like, I imagine that opening up this beach to the rest of the public that may not have had an opportunity to get there, making it accessible is probably something that we would want to put as a high priority. So are these porta potties accessible in any way?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, certainly we're going to buy or have a contractor that's bringing in porta potties that will have that option. Whether and how the people would get to them, because of course there's a lot of sand in those areas. So I can't speak to all the pathways that are leading to it, but certainly we'll do our best to make sure that they're accessible as much as we can make them.
Great. Thank you for that. Mr. Lamming, I have another question as well. Some constituents have brought up a concern about, and I'm sure that there's similar situations throughout the rest of the city and for transit, but what were to happen if some minors unaccompanied, let's say, I don't know, 10 or 11-year-olds ended up way out there? Is that a concern of ours? Does that run any risk or pose any liability issues? And that might not necessarily be a question that you could answer, but perhaps Ms. Fields.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, yes, we did take that into consideration. As a normal transit usage, anyone under the age of 12 accompanied by a responsible adult can take transit. It's usually left up to the discretion of the driver to kind of gauge the age of the individual. And if they're under the age of 12, they wouldn't be allowed to go out to Pointe de Chene on their own from that perspective.
Great, thank you. I assumed there was something. I just wanted to be sure for myself and for the public. During this report, did we look at any considerations about having a lifeguard? Do we have to have a lifeguard out there? I know that we don't currently, but does this open us up for any extra liability in that sense?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, the topic was discussed with respect to potential lifeguards. There was no lifeguards recommended as part of this plan. That would be something that would be above and beyond the cost of the scope of this project right here, and something that we would have to explore further if that was to be part of this pilot.
Okay. I think those are all the questions I have on this matter, so thank you.
Councilor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Scott asked a number of my questions, so I've only got comments left. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Lamming and his department for getting this report back. I'm as hard as anybody on staff for taking a long time to get us reports back. But here's an example. I think I asked for this. It was either 2 or 4 weeks ago. I think it was 4 at this point, but it's back. It's recommended for approval. It's within the existing budget. It's a pilot program to see what works, and if it works, you know, recommendations will come in the future for continuation of it, hopefully. And it's a great way to get people to a city service that they might not otherwise be able to access, especially folks who are far away from Pointe-du-Chêne, like those in the East End and downtown. So I really appreciate the report. Thank you for the recommendation to try the pilot, and hopefully it is successful.
Hey, Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions to Mr. Lamming. According to your map, will residents be able to pick up the bus service anywhere on the route, or do they have to pick it up at on Queen Street at the bus terminal?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we built it with allowing to encompass the downtown terminal starting at Dennis Street, going up through to the new northern transfer point, which will be in effect very soon. And then through second line, allowing to pick up people along the way. So there'll be the 2 transfer points, the Dennis Street terminal and the northern transfer point, which will be the points of origination, and then allowing all the people to go to either one of those 2 locations to transfer, or along the route all the way out to Pointe-du-Chêne.
Another question, and I don't know if it was asked, I lost my internet. So regarding barbecues, coolers, the portable barbecue, the coolers, etc., what's going to be allowed to be brought on the bus? And will the driver be responsible to bring it on the bus, or will it be the rider? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, anyone that attends transit will bring their own goods on the bus in typical fashion, just like groceries from a grocery store. They would be bringing their own goods on the bus, whatever allowed in a concealed package.
So will there be a limit of what you can bring on the bus?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bruni, given COVID, we would hope that the public would allow for reasonable amounts to come on the bus at any one time, given our social distancing that we're allowed at this point in time. So that's one of the things that we would have to bring back from the pilot to see if there is an onerous amount that's coming onto the bus at one time, and we would have to reevaluate and report back.
Because give you an example, say a family of 4, they bring 2 chairs, a cooler, a portable barbecuer, that would be allowed on the bus?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, a small cooler and a bag for the day would be allowed on the bus. If we're looking at much larger items, that would be a challenge to bring on the bus at this time.
So chairs would be a challenge.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, no chairs would be allowed to come on the bus. Just like even when we allow our bikes on the bus, we do allow some larger items. We just have to be cognizant of how many people are taking the bus at any one time, and the requirements that are going to be accompanied along with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hollingsworth, I have you next. I just wasn't sure yet if Councillor Bruni was done there.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Lamming. A couple of questions from constituents. Most of the constituents are excited about this idea. First question is, did you consider doing a family pass?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, as stated earlier, children accompanied by an adult under their age of 12 are free. So that would allow for a family to come to the beach with respect to a $6 fee, $3 there and $3 back for any children under the age of 12 with their supporting accompanying a responsible adult.
Okay, so just to clarify, anyone that's over the age of 12, a teenager, will still have to pay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that's correct.
Okay, maybe you would still reconsider a family pass because teenagers are still financially challenged and so forth. So it's still a family event. I just want to pass that on as a gesture from a constituent. Also, you talked about large items. I'm hoping and assuming that this particular bus will be outfitted with a bike rack. I know some of our buses have bike racks on externally. Would you consider putting a bike rack on this particular bus?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes, we'll also be having a few buses arrive, as everyone's aware, this summer. So those all come outfitted with bike racks, and we have numerous ones that do have bike racks. So we'll make sure that the bus that's dedicated for this service does have a bike rack.
Okay, that's wonderful news. And let's see here. I know this is a pilot project. Your worship, can I make a comment at this time, or do we save our comments?
Go ahead, make a comment.
Okay, I understand it's a pilot project. I hope that once this pilot project is over, that we can sit down again and look at the pros and cons, because I think that there's still an opportunity to have an activity bus, an adventure bus, not just going to the beach, but again, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, going to Hiawatha. There's still families that cannot get to other wonderful picnic areas, hiking areas that are in our own city. So would you make a mental note, Mr. Lamming, that when this pilot is done, is there a possibility to consider an adventure bus, and where it just takes people to 2 or 3 key gorgeous areas that are full of activities like the beach, like Hiawatha in the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Do we have anybody else on that matter? Seeing none, Councillor Bezo-Allen, do you have additional matters on consent?
Just quickly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.15.
Okay.
And I just had a couple of questions. Is Ms. McLeod on the line?
I'm not sure if we have her with us, but we do. Virginia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks very much. Ms. McLeod, the Sioux Film Festival, just over 13,000. And I know due to COVID, you know, many of us have had hardships. Is this for which film festival is this for? Is it for the bandshell at the Bellevue Park?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen. They've been working on developing a film festival this year, but most of the groups did submit alternate contingency plans in the event that they have to scale back. So there are been concessions made in order to address potential COVID issues with gathering limits. Sorry, I'm just pulling the application.
Oh, no problem.
So they're looking at potentially doing different locations for their event. The film festival I think you're thinking of is usually Shadows of the Mind does the movies in the park at Bellevue Park.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay, is this a new group then?
Correct. This is a new group. They are looking to start a larger film festival here. So it would be in addition to what the Shadows of the Mind is doing and run through a different organization.
Okay. Okay. And my only other just one other question and then a quick comment. Thinking Rock Community Arts, they're based in Thessalon. So is this amount for something that they're doing in Sault Ste. Marie?
Yes, that's correct. The activities are taking place in Sault Ste. Marie, and they're engaging other individuals within the local area.
Okay, great. So my only comment would be, especially for the public when they see this report, is to have like a short little bullet point under each funded amount. So a lot of people probably don't know that Art Speak is running out of the museum and deals with people with mental health and people that are going through trauma, and it's an art therapy program. So I think if there's like a little blurb about what each organization is getting funded for very quickly, I think that would be really helpful in terms of communicating to the greater public of exactly what it is that we're funding.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, we can definitely make sure next year when this comes to council that we have a small summary for each organization for your review.
Thanks, Virginia. Appreciate it. And to everyone that was on the review committee.
Okay. Anybody else in 6.15? Councillor Gardy.
Mr. Mayor, forgive me, much like Councillor Bruni, I'm having some connectivity issues. Would you mind if I asked a question on the Point of Shane bus? Because
So listen, I'll circle back on that. Whenever a few of you have had connectivity issues, and when you drop off, you're not on my main screen anymore. So I didn't see you when you came back. I apologize for that. Let me finish 6.15, then I'm gonna go back to 6.14, and then you can speak to it then.
thanks.
So anybody else on 6.15? Okay, seeing none. So we'll go back to 6.14. You and Councillor Hilsinger had your hand up, and I missed you both because you weren't on my main screen. So I'll start with you, Councillor Gardy, then I'll go to Councillor Hilsinger.
Okay, that being said, if this was asked already, sorry about that. But through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming, could you speak to traditionally what kind of staff and or security is on site at the day park?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, anytime on the day we have from 3 to 11 p.m. we have security on site, and then throughout the day we do have summer student staff and the supervisor on site.
Thank you. That was it.
Okay, Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I received I think we all did actually receive some correspondence with some concerns about the cleanliness of the park in recent years, and in particular overflow of parking and not enough parking space. Is there anything that we're looking at addressing in general? It's not related to the bus, obviously, but there's concerns about this from people who are living in that area. Perhaps Mr. Lamming could comment on that, or whomever would be appropriate.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I see Deputy CEO Girardi's on the call for that question.
Thank you.
You, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. At this time, we had no intentions of doing further areas or clearing out areas for parking. Actually, this past year was the first year that the day park really had a lot of activity to it, more so than we have in the past, and due to COVID, of course, and that was fantastic. And I imagine going forward, if the activity continues in the day park, we would be coming to council to look at doing improvements in there. So certainly there is a great potential for that park to do so much more than we do now. As far as cleanliness, we do have staff on. We keep students there all the time, and a supervisor inspects and checks to make sure we do keep the areas clean. And we'll be doing the same thing that we have done in the past this year.
Thanks, Mr. Girardi.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on that, Councillor Hilsinger? Okay, so that ends 6.14 and 6.15. So Councillor Bezo-Allen, did you have anything else?
Just 6.16, the $40,000 to go towards public art installations.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. McLeod.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Virginia. Just a question. Who is going to be supervising the $40,000 and what are you looking at in terms of public art installations? Because 40,000 certainly would not go very far in terms of any sort of sculpture or things like that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen. The hope is that we're actually going to be working on a public art policy with the Arts and the Cultural Vitality Committee, and that's going to set out the parameters for public art and how we go about acquiring it. But this could be large scale or small scale art installations. So on a smaller scale, it could be a $5,000 mural or a community partnership project with the university, for example, to do some type of art installation. Mrs. Shell could speak to also looking at if funds are unspent, how those may go into a reserve if we're saving up for a much larger piece that would exceed the $40,000 limit or $40,000 annual funding, so that we could eventually purchase larger scale pieces.
Okay, I would just ask in terms of the committee work and deciding on geographical areas, there has been attention in the downtown area for public art. So it would be nice to see public art be throughout the community, not just in the downtown core. Thanks, Virginia. No, I don't have any other questions.
Anybody on 6.16?
I do.
Councillor Hollingsworth, go ahead.
Thank you. Through your worship to Ms. Virginia McLeod. Can you comment on the art? Will the parameters include interactive art? I think that in the past, one or two council meetings before, you've said that some art you're hoping for would be interactive, where children can go up and you know, like maybe play with it and have like hands-on approach, which would stimulate education, stimulate children's activities. Would that be by chance one of the parameters that you might be considering?
That's through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Yeah, as far as the public art pieces, that would definitely be something that we'd be taking into consideration. There's, you know, some pretty incredible art pieces that are also interactive and provide a bit of a sensory experience and an opportunity for community members to engage with the art. So, you know, those types of art pieces would be covered under the public art policy.
Wonderful, that's good news. And to friends of mine that also have children with autism, that would be, I think, quite attractive. So excellent, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else on that report? See none, and that was it for you, Councillor Bezo-Allen?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Council, do we have any other matters on consent? Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.10, voter engagement.
Go ahead.
Through you to Miss the Deputy City Clerk, Ms. Zupa. Thank you, Madison, for the report. It's coincidence that it ended up on the agenda at the same time as my motion at 8 point, whatever it is, 2 or 3. But as part of your report herein, you are going to be examining whether mail-out ballots would be an option for next fall's municipal election.
Madison, you're on mute still. So you're still on mute.
Yes, gotcha.
My apologies, Rachel and I are sharing a phone. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yes, absolutely. We're going to look at a number of voting alternative methods, including the mail-in vote, and also looking at the vote by phone, internet voting, and just looking at some other parameters around the traditional vote in person.
Yeah, perfect. I appreciate that. I think that the ultimate goal obviously should be to get as many people voting as possible. I do know that there were issues with the online voting system. I think it was in Sudbury or London in the last election. So I would be hesitant to be at the front of the line on that one, but it does seem from other elections happening in British Columbia, and in the US, obviously, that the mail-in ballots have increased turnout from past elections. So hopeful that we can get some concrete evidence on that and have a positive result next fall.
Okay. I see Councillor Bruni on the same topic. Councillor Bruni, 6.10.
Yes, Mayor.
And then after Councillor Bruni, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. And thank you to Madison and Councillor Shoemaker for bringing this forward, because it does tie in with 8.3. So I guess my main concern is what about the preliminary list of electors? It's always outdated. Is city staff going to be reviewing? Just to give you an example, Madison, I found 17 names in the first 10 pages in my preliminary list of electors that no longer live in the Sioux, but not just from the last election, from the past election. Some of the children don't live with their parents anymore. They live elsewhere, but they're still on the electoral list according to the ward. So I guess my main concern is, when will that be updated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, those are perennial problems with the impact data that we have, and certainly the city clerk's office is as frustrated or more so than anyone else with the quality of that data. For 2022, we will be using impact data. Beyond that, I believe we're going to be sharing information with Elections Ontario, so every hope is that once that comes to pass, that we will have a much more accurate and robust voters list. However, for the 2022 election, we're still using the impact data, and I can only reiterate that we're as frustrated as anybody else with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No problem. Councillor Hollingsworth, you're up next.
Thank you. To your worship, to Ms. Madison, I appreciate that we're going to be looking at the options of mail-in, electronic, and so forth. I'm under the impression when you do your research, you're going to be coming back with data based on a number of municipalities across Canada, or will you be just looking at what municipalities have done in Ontario?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, we are going to look at best practices from across Canada, certainly not excluding other communities across Canada that have had great success. Certainly we're going to look not only at alternative voting, but also voting locations, certainly accessibility and all of those factors. The survey and the forum themselves will engage our local citizens in past election outcomes, as well as suggestions going forward. So it will engage our local population to hear what they're saying as well. So we're going to look at both best practices from Ontario and Canada, as well as local citizen feedback.
Okay, if I may make a suggestion or comment, as you continue on researching this out, please keep in mind our senior citizens. Please keep in mind those that may have accessibility needs, that may not be able to use a computer. And I'm just drawing these conclusions based on what I've read in the Globe and Mail recently on the most recent election. Granted, the election took place during COVID, but a number of the mail-in ballots weren't actually completed, weren't actually sent in by voters because of different problems. So first point, please keep in mind our demographics, which is, I think, very important, and technology. And I would like to see in the report the pros and cons with data, as in the numbers and percentage and so forth. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could add in too, we are working with Nancy Scott, the accessibility coordinator, to get that feedback as well through their committee and those concerns, and as well the manager of Rec and Culture, Virginia McLeod, has offered to work with us as well to try to engage more of the senior community through the senior centers.
Thank you. That's all.
Anybody else on 610? No? Okay, anybody else with matters in the consent agenda? Councilor Shoemaker, you have another matter?
Yes, just one more question on 6.5, the investment report, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Through you to Ms. Shell. I noticed our investment advisor on, I can't think of what the account name is there, is from British Columbia. Is there any possibility that we could have someone either from Ontario or even better, someone locally manage our municipal investments on a go-forward basis or in the coming years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. When we did put out for the short-term investments, an RFP was done. So there was various, I think we had 11 respondents from it. There was some local, there was some from different investment companies, as well as the big banks, which also aren't necessarily a local investment opportunity. As I was saying previously, and when Mr. Paul Christian had asked about the investments, we are under the regulation very limited to what we can invest in. And some of the local proponents, the investment instruments that they had submitted would not necessarily meet the criteria of the regulation. So that did limit us into where we could invest.
Okay. And how often do you anticipate we'll be going back out to RFP for these services?
If I recall, the RFP was for a 5-year term with a possible 3-year extension. Again, it costs us to move the money. We're keeping it in anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So we want to give an opportunity to have a couple of those cycles before we move into another RFP.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else in 6.5? Okay, so listen, there's a few more matters. I think Councillor Bruni, you had put your hand up, but we are at 5:33 here, and we do have a planning matter. So what we're going to do is leave consent. We'll come back to consent to finish it up, and we'll deal with whatever matters remaining on consent. Then we'll deal with 6:19, and then we'll move on. So for the time being, though, Madam Clerk, I think we need to move to our planning matter.
Mayor,
Yes, Councillor Hollingsworth?
just for procedure, do I sign off since I have a conflict, or how would you like me to handle this?
Yeah, I mean, you can. You'd still be just as if you're leaving the room, but you'd still be able to watch. I don't know if the CEO has any. I don't have a concern with you being on as long as you don't participate.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. When we are present in the council chambers for a meeting, there is no requirement that you actually leave the room. It's just that you can undertake no actions to try and influence the vote. I would suggest in this case you can stop the video feed while the item is going on, and obviously you'd be muted for it as well.
Okay. Maybe if I could suggest Madison could just email me to say when to come back on. Thank you.
You can also watch and just come back on when we're done.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so that brings to 7.7, Madam Clerk.
That's application A521ZOP and 57T21502, 163 Foxborough Trail and 907 Third Line East, Fox Run Developments Sioux Incorporated. And we do have the Sam Biasucci and Joey Biasucci on behalf of the applicants, and Peter Bortolucci and Josh Lelevre, both as agents of the applicants. And there were 5 neighbors registered. Not everyone has joined the call at this point. And not all of them necessarily wanted to speak, but they wanted to be included.
Okay, so before we get to the applicant, I'm going to start with Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, you're on the call, I see.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This application is for the Fox Run development, which is located on Third Line, immediately east of the hospitals. This subdivision, and it's a very large subdivision actually, was originally approved by council in 2007. And then there were amendments made to the zoning and the draft plan in 2011. Mr. Biasucci is the applicant. He's come back and has requested further changes to the zoning, basically to downzone the property to permit more single detached units, as well as to amend the draft approval of the plan of subdivision to reflect that. I think, Mr. Mayor, there has been some confusion in the public over the weekend. The net effect of the request amendments by Mr. Biasucci would be to reduce the overall density of the subdivision to by approximately 300 units. What we're going from is basically multiple family and up to 5-story apartment buildings to single family development in a fairly significant portion of the development, which has a big effect on reducing the total number of units. It is recommended for approval, and as the clerk pointed out, Mr. Biasucci and others are on the line should council have any questions on this.
And before I move to the applicants, Mr. McConnell, I'm going to just touch on one point that I think is really important for the public communication and public awareness. You've indicated it, but I'd like you just to be very clear about it for those that are watching. This isn't a new application before us, in that these properties have been before us and previous councils have approved residential subdivisions on these properties. What Mr. Biasucci is doing here today is he's brought a new application to reduce essentially the density of the subdivision and the number of units he's looking to build on these properties. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Mr. Mayor. The original subdivision was approved by council in 2007, and these are simply amendments to that approval that's being requested.
Okay. I made that point because I think it's important for people to understand that that's the history of this subdivision. So we have available to us the applicant. We have Mr. Biasucci here with us, and we also have Mr. Peter Bortoluzzi. To confirm my understanding, Mr. Bortoluzzi is your counsel for Mr. Biasucci. And while he kind of figures out how to unmute his iPhone there, Madam Clerk, you said there was another person on for the applicant. I didn't catch that name. You're on mute too,
Sorry,
Madam Clerk.
Josh, yeah. Josh Lelever with Tulloch.
Okay, so the engineer with Tulloch. Very good. So we have Mr. Biasucci, his legal counsel, Mr. Bortoluzzi, and then his engineering counsel available to us. And then we have a number of people that have asked to register that might have some comments in opposition to the application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Mr. Biasucci, and whoever on his team would like to make representations in favor of the application. And then I'll give anybody who's concerned about the application a chance to make those representations. And then I'll open the floor to council to ask questions of either the applicant or the staff. So Mr. Biasucci, is anybody speaking on behalf of the application? Mr. Biasucci, you're on mute, so if you could just,
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, thank you so much. As Mr. Elliott pointed out, it is a straightforward request. We are actually basically reacting to market conditions, and we have as we have in the past 40 years, what you planned yesterday is not necessarily good for tomorrow, and this is another one of those. At the times of the planning, the hospital wasn't even built, and things have developed in a different fashion, and we are now basically reacting to the current housing demands and what the market can actually absorb. So what we had envisioned then, we're tweaking that now. At the time, we missed preserving the single residential status on the plan. So we asked that be reinstated. It is our wish at this time that the west side of Fox Run will basically develop in single family residential, at least the first phase, which will be a new roadway that will connect the third line as it was always originally planned. And we'll look back to Madison Avenue. And phase 2 would be another loop, smaller off of Madison Avenue, would basically be a circle. at this point, don't know exactly whether that will continue with singles. If I had to give you the answer today, I would say we probably will be. A year from now, that might change again to something different, but all within the aspect of an upscale retirement community as we have developed on Fox Run. And we want to maintain that aspect of the subdivision. There's been a lot of talk into, and I might as well address that as well at this point, the affordability requirements. Again, as staff and everyone knows, we've been at that for 40 years, and we have always pushed the affordability aspect of everything. We have in the first phase as well of Fox Run. And it may surprise everyone, but the last unit that we had that was affordable, which was below $300,000, I still own it. It's 7 years and it's rented. We were not successful in selling it to anyone. Anything that's sold in there was well north of those figures. So there's as Mr. McConnell and Mr. Donato pointed out, there's plenty of affordable housing within Sault Ste. Marie. We are blessed with that. And with the new, it is forthcoming. Bylaws are not in place yet. Staff is diligently working on that. Perhaps permitting additional units within the new units that are being developed is something that will come as it is in the larger cities. We don't have a lot of laneways, but like Southern Ontario has, and is developing a healthy laneway market building where without wasting and spending a lot of money for new lands, you basically develop a rental unit in the back of your property and provide affordability that way. That's coming, whether it be basement additional units, whether it be on top of a garage, whether it would be in the backyard. Once those bylaws will come into place, of course, that will be revisited. But at this particular point, we think we have addressed all of the aspects of good housing. And like I said, this subdivision will continue in the manner and fashion as it has started, which is a premier first-class development, and we wish to continue it that way. And I don't really want to change anything else from what's in the report. Again, we're blessed to have a staff that does most of the work for us developers. I don't have to do a whole lot. This was well done and well written, and if I go any further, I'll probably screw it up.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Biasucci. Madam Clerk, Mr. Biasucci, is anybody else, is your engineer, your lawyer, are they going to make any representations? Mr. Biasucci, just before I move on, is anybody else from your side, is anybody else from the applicant's side going to make any representations?
No, Mr. Mayor, I will be leading the conversation and will be answering the questions.
Okay, very good. So, Madam Clerk, we had a number of people registered, so I'm just going to give people the opportunity now. Do we know if any of those people wanted to make representations to council?
Only one of those individuals is on the call. That's Janice Poulin-Zerwinski.
Okay. Ms. Poulin-Zerwinski, were you looking to make representations to council, or were you just on the call to listen in?
Mute.
Yeah, so I have a Janice here on my screen, but that Janice is on mute, if that's the same Janice.
That is the neighbor, yes.
So we will give anybody who's looking to make representations that's opposed to the application that opportunity. In the meantime, I'm going to move to council. Council, do we have any questions for either Mr. McConnell or the applicant? So we'll start with Councillor Lisa Vezowalan. Go ahead, Councillor Vezowalan, and then Councillor Dufour, and then Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McConnell. As myself and my colleagues on council have been receiving messages concerning the 30% affordable housing target, I did some diving into the municipal, the affordable housing as based on the province through the Planning Act that was approved in December 2020 by the province. And it was very vague. It just states, and this is section 4, subsection 28, affordable housing, of community improvement in subsection for greater certainty. It includes the provision of affordable housing. So the provincial statement is that it includes the provision of affordable housing, but does not give a specific amount in that statement, in that policy statement. So Mr. McConnell, if you could please clarify, and I had spoken to Mr. Tonazzo this morning, and he answered some questions, can you walk us through exactly what our policy is in our official plan for that 30%? My understanding is that it includes 30% of the housing that is for sale within our entirety of our community, not specific to any one development. So if you could, for all of us here and for all of the people watching, please elaborate on that in terms of that 30% and how it is met or needs to be met.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezzo-Allen. The 30% number originally came from a provincial government directive back in the mid-1990s, and it's still in our official plan. However, it is not in any current legislation. It's not in the Planning Act. It's not in the provincial policy statements which bound municipalities. So there is no specific requirement. I think there was a realization that you can't build new affordable housing without significant government subsidy. So, that phrase, the requirement, we are planning on removing that with our new official plan, which council will see very shortly. You've made a really good point, which is when people talk about affordable housing, it is as a percent, and the 30% number is quite common though. You'll see the industry use it a lot of municipalities use it. When you talk to Ministry of Municipal Affairs staff, they frequently use it. They are referring to 30% of your housing. It should be your goal of all of the housing stock in the community, whether it's owned or rented. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing does do detailed analysis of property sales in Sault Ste. Marie for every municipality in the province. And they have determined that just over 50% of our housing is affordable. Now, that doesn't mean that it's affordable to everyone. You will always have that problem where there were some people just due to lack of income will not be able to afford modest housing. But using their calculations, just over 50% of all of the housing stock in Sault Ste. Marie is deemed affordable. The city has taken a little different approach as far as encouraging more affordable housing. As I said, you can't go to a developer and say you must build affordable housing without being able to provide them with a subsidy. But what we have done is we've changed our zoning bylaw to allow second units in virtually every residential zone. We've rezoned, and council has dealt with a number of these various properties throughout the community to allow multiple family housing, which does help with the costs. And we do have a community improvement plan in place for rental housing, which over the last few years has seen more than 300 units built. So the city has taken more of a carrot approach rather than a stick approach to getting more affordable housing on the market. But as it stands now, compared to a lot of other municipalities, the Sioux is in quite good shape.
Now, the number you have is from 2018, which gives the average median resale price at $208,000. So in this new official plan, are you going to be updating that number to more recent stats? And what is the most recent stats that you can get for resale median price?
That 218 or the 2018 stat is the most recent we can get. That is from Municipal Affairs and Housing. And they will every year produce a report, and we will update our official plan as it goes on. I don't see that it makes a significant change to the city's strategy, which is to have more property zoned for multiple units, allow for second units, and provide incentives where there's a noticeable lacking in a particular type of housing. But those numbers are updated every year by Municipal Affairs. That is the most recent number that they've provided us.
And in the 25 years that this official plan has had the 30% affordable housing in a development such as Mr. Biasucci's, has there been a requirement that 30% of the dwellings be deemed affordable in terms of the numbers that we have?
No, for two reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, it's just not possible to build brand new affordable housing. And secondly, the provincial requirement to do that ended about 25 years ago. That was a very short-lived requirement. I think all parties realized that it didn't work.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. So I think it's definitely time for us to update our policies. Thank you for the information.
Okay, so I have Councillor Dufour next.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Vezo-Allen asked several of my questions, and Mr. McConnell gave excellent answers. So thank you very much for clarifying some of those issues, Mr. McConnell. One of the last questions that I wanted to ask, I heard from several constituents via email, calls, text, social media. A lot of folks got a hold of me, very concerned about the affordable requirement being waived for this development. And I think behind a lot of that concern, some people were very explicit with this, is that people feel as though assessment values are being shifted away from established neighborhoods in the downtown core and new housing stock, and then the population is moving further north and is moving to new neighborhoods that aren't necessarily paying for the cost of that expanded development. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of the revenue tools that are available to municipalities to address some of these concerns and why they're better than waivers such as this housing policy.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, if I understood your question correctly, you were looking to say, well, what other tools are out there that the city could use to either encourage housing or to pay for the costs of, to help pay for the cost of new housing? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's about a shift in assessment base, moving out of our established neighborhoods, out of the West End, out of the downtown core, and being moved to the north end of the city. I know that might not be specifically germane to Mr. Biasucci's details of his development here, but it was a very, very common theme in all of my constituent feedback about this specific rezoning.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, I think in a large extent that the development that we're seeing now, we're still seeing considerable development in the East End. We're seeing considerable development in the North End. We are starting to see a lot of infill development in the West End. So it's difficult to just say, okay, well, one area is doing really well and other areas aren't doing that great. You know, in part, it's a function of the market. Where do people want to live? In another part, it's where is their land available and the services to go with it. So it is, and this is not just in Sioux Ste. Marie. I mean, this is true of all northern communities. This is probably true of most communities outside of the GTA. To go back in and reinvest in an existing community anywhere where you have to acquire land, it's usually multiple owners in order to do a significant project, is much more expensive than going out and buying a greenfield site. Just acquiring property, demolishing, rebuilding, that's an expensive proposition, more so than a greenfield site. And again, in a lot of cases, for instance, the development, I can think of several developments that are very attractive to people to move into, and that's where people move to. So it's not really an easy answer. You're right. Has there been a shift in assessment? Yes. You know, we're seeing certainly Mr. Biasucci's development, the other developments in that part of town, other developments in the East End. We're seeing major growth in assessment, but we are starting to see more and more infill, not just in the downtown, but in the West End as well. And it's taking the place of multiple family development. That's what's happening. We're getting semis, we are getting multiple family development. So there is some of that happening. Does that answer your question?
That does help, Mr. McConnell. I think the issue as it pertains to the affordability is that if the city in our official plan is using all available units in the city to help meet our affordability targets, if the quality of those units and the neighborhoods in which those houses reside is of a lower, less desirable quality to a certain level compared to new development, I think that's where people's concerns begin to be raised as we build new. Are we making sure that the existing housing stock that is left to be affordable is of a good quality and in places where the quality of life is similar? And so I wanted to publicly share those concerns because I think they are valid. However, I do believe, as you've indicated in your report and your comments here tonight, that the best way to address those concerns is not with unfortunately, a 30-year outdated housing regulation, but with other tools that the municipality can examine at a later date. So thank you very much, Mr. McConnell, for that information.
Is that the extent of your questions, Councillor Dufour?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, Mr. McConnell, I'm going to ask you to adjust your camera. There's just, you can only see, 3/4 of your face. So it'd be, yeah, there you go. That's a bit better. Okay, next I have Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and perhaps you'll be happy to know that Ms. Hilsinger and I have combined our questions into me asking them so that we can shorten up the meeting to the extent possible.
First, I would be happier if you combine them into her asking them. That would probably be more effective in shortening the meeting.
First, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McConnell. I've had some folks reach out to suggest that this development represents urban sprawl in our community. Could you confirm if the services that run to the proposed subdivisions are municipal services in the sense of water and sanitary sewer lines?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, I can confirm that. This property is inside the urban service line. So it does pay urban taxes. It does receive urban services. It's also, if I may speak just for a moment on the larger question of urban sprawl, the city is required to have what's known as an urban settlement area. We have that as part of our official plan now, and that is not going to change greatly moving forward. That is basically a line on a map that's approved by the province where you're going to encourage the majority of your development to occur. And this property is also inside the urban settlement area. And that's how we deal with urban sprawl. Yeah.
Okay. And where is the line on the north end of the city currently?
The urban settlement area is just north of Third Line. The urban service line is a much more convoluted line because it does recognize that it's actually a taxation instrument, and it does recognize the Great Northern Road up just north of Fourth Line is service. So those properties do pay urban services.
Okay, so we aren't extending our urban services to this development for it to proceed.
That's correct. This property is already serviced.
Okay.
The trunk servicing is in place, yes.
Excellent, thank you. I've been dealing with Councillor Hilsinger and the engineering department for a number of, probably for a number of years at this point on traffic on Foxborough. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Biasucci. During construction, Mr. Biasucci, how do you intend for your vehicles to access the new construction sites? Will it be through Foxborough, coming from Old Garden River, or from Third Line, or some other access?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, as you can see from the plan attached, it's not all that clear, but our intent is to commence from Third Line and connecting to the back end of Madison Avenue, which would mean that the majority of the traffic on that particular service will come from Third Line. On the Tuscany side, we do have provisions for a temporary access through the gully. However, the Third Line is up for reconstruction. Excuse me, is up for reconstruction, and that will interfere a fair bit. There will be probably a certain length of time this summer where Third Line will be off limits for other than to local traffic of the few houses that actually live on third line and frontage on third line. So a combination of several access will take place at any given time. Again, my clients on Foxborough have always been my first concern. They are my clients. I put in their beautiful driveways. I maintain and manicure the landscapes in the common areas because I know the city can get there, and I don't want it to look like some of the other places. I want them to look like our subdivision. So the road will be no less than that, Councilor. I understand the concerns, and I share that with all our residents. There's been other construction happening in the north end, and sometimes I make it a point to explain when I see the neighbors that the mud on the street did not come from a southern construction site. We are very meticulous in keeping our construction sites neat, short, clean, and looking good. The 54 residents that live on Fox Run are our salespeople. I am not going to interfere with my sales staff. Those are my salespeople. They're the ones that bring their friends to our community. So they're our most and foremost concern going forward. But yes, we will do everything we possibly can to avoid using. Plus, it's a street that we built, and we would like to keep it in the best shape possible. I don't want to run it with 500 truckloads of material up and down. I'll do all I can to preserve it.
Okay, thank you. That's a very full answer. Thank you. So the access will be off a third line for the most part. Will you be able to access? I'm trying to think of which one's furthest east here. I think it's Tuscany is furthest east. Will you be able to access Tuscany from Madison if you needed to avoid going down Fox Run? Will you be able to cut across?
To a certain extent, some of it, yeah, we can from the shorter side, but we do have residents on Madison as well. So the cleanest way we're looking at was the crossing through the ravine at the front between Third Line and Madison, at Third Line and Tuscany. That would be the cleanest way. We will have to negotiate that with the city engineering staff and whoever the contract will be for Third Line and share access. But it is our intention to limit everything we possibly can from Foxborough. We house those residents there not to screw up their summers, and even though they understand they moved into a construction development that will last a while, it's lasted a lot longer than I originally wanted it to. This conversation should happen 6 years ago. We should be all done by now. So we will do everything we possibly can as we always have. Okay,
thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McConnell, in terms of drainage concerns, we've heard from folks that are on the, I guess it would be the west side of Fox Run about drainage concerns from the hospital. And we've heard from folks as far east as Old Garden River Road about drainage concerns on increased flows from not just the Fox Run subdivision that's gone in, but the hospital and all the additional infrastructure that's put hard surfaces on the land from Great Northern Road eastbound. Is there provision? I know there's talk of an aqueduct here. Do you believe from a planning perspective, or maybe it's an engineering question, that it will be able to manage the stormwater that will be created here? Perhaps it's a question, in fact, for Mr. Biasucci's engineer.
I can take that, Mr. McConaughey, if you wish, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker. When we did the comprehensive design of the subdivision back in 2007, we took all of that under consideration and everything was accounted for. We did build a fairly elaborate storm retention pond, which was challenged. And it functioned very, very well about 5-6 years ago when we had the one major storm where the pond actually, and then Perry, one of the city engineers, had pictures from myself in the middle of the storm, watching how it was functioning. One of the things that I was blessed to learn from one of the city engineers that you walk a subdivision in the middle of a storm and figure out everything you did wrong. That functioned perfectly. We discovered that the city hospital pond, storm retention pond, had a deficiency. We asked that be corrected, and they did, because the water was flowing too fast coming to our storm retention pond. And that since got corrected. If anybody drives the Avery Road, there is a cut on the road with a manhole, and that was the result of that 100-year storm challenge that proved whether the design was right or wrong. It was 100% accounted for all of the additional units. And I will remind the councilors right now listening that we are actually cutting back the pavement and the hard surfaces and investing in more green with the single homes. If we were leave it the way it is, you will probably see 500, 600 parking spaces that will be paved and collecting rushing water 100 times faster than this ever will. So, but it was accounted for. To answer your question, it is accounted for to take the zoning as it is and the amount of units in excess of 700 as it is, and anything that we certainly build less than that would provide additional space for whatever else that comes with it.
Right. Okay. So you're saying it's designed to take on the water from 700 units and the hard surfaces that go with it, and you're only planning on building whatever it is for 400, I think it is.
Correct. And so I tried to test them through.
Okay. Thank you. And the last one, you touched on it, but green space. I understand there's a parkland reserve in this project. Perhaps Mr. McConnell could answer that.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Shoemaker, yes. When the project was approved in 2007, there's a parkland, there's about a 5% of the total site actually is a parkland located in the eastern part of the subdivision, which will be the last part to be developed. There's also a stormwater pond in there as well. There's a number of stormwater ponds throughout the site which do provide green space. So that matter has been dealt with. It was part of the original subdivision agreement, and that will be carried forward with any amendments that council approves.
And is the plan for an actual park?
Yes, plan is for a park.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are mine and Councillor Hilsinger's questions.
Okay, Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to Mr. McConnell regarding if you can clarify a little bit, rezoning property from the low density residential zone with special exception 306. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit for me, please.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. Special exception 306 was part of a previous approval by council. What it does is it allows for a combination of townhouses or semi-detached townhouses and apartment buildings of up to 5 stories in height. That is no longer consistent with Mr. Biasucci's plans. He would prefer to build a good portion of the property that is covered by that zoning as single family. Hence, the request before council tonight is to add single family as a permitted use to that. And if you look at the layout on the amended draft plans, it's basically all for single family lots.
Yes. So my next question would be basically for the sewers, the water. Would the connections be on Third Line East, the major one coming in to the subject properties?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, perhaps Mr. Biasucci's engineer could help us with that, but council should be aware that the applicant or the developer will provide detailed servicing plans to the city, which will be approved by both the city and the PUC as a condition of final approval. But Mr. Biasucci, perhaps Josh Levine could help with that answer.
I'm comfortable answering that, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. We have looped the water main. We extended the water main 6 years ago when we put in Fox Run from the dead end where it was at the Avery Road entrance to the hospital. We extended it to just past the entrance of Fox Run. We looped it through Fox Run. We looped it with all the way through down to the old Garden River Road, which was already at a dead end at our, that would be the eastern property line. And so we have a loop to water main, and the sewage flows to Old Garden. The sewage flows through the Viengi subdivision down to the treatment plant, does not flow through third line.
So there won't be any road construction on third line.
We do not need to touch third line in any way for services. The only thing that will connect the third line is the new Madison Avenue, which was always the plan. We always had that permitted access to connect on to third line with a second access. But that access will be a dry access. There will be no water, no sewer, no services whatsoever coming through on that connection.
And Mr. Biasucci, if this is approved tonight, when would you start? Or do you have a plan? Like, I know you have 26 semi-detached homes, which turns out to be 52 dwelling units and 57 single detached lots. Will you be doing them in quarters or in thirds, or just keep on building? Or
Mr. Mayor, the Councilor Bruni, it is our intention to hit the pavement running. Of course, we have engineering being completed on both phases, and they address two totally different aspects of clientele and sales. The Tuscany side, of course, addresses the more of the senior retirement aspect, where the west side would be more geared to a single family occupancy, where we would like to see some younger families and children and whatnot, and entering the entire development. So they will both probably be proceeding in a parallel. And I don't want to put Josh on the spot, but as soon as engineering gets completed, we have plans to be on the ground, yes.
And my final question, I guess, to Mr. McConnell regarding Mr. Powell and Mr. Best. I guess the developer, Mr. Biasucci, has agreed to build a fence and plant 6-foot cedar trees. Is that part of the, I guess, contract? Would this be in writing, et cetera, like the protection for these homeowners?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, yes, that would be a condition of approval that we'd include in the subdivision agreement.
And what would the timeline be for that? I mean, is it like 2 years, 3 years from now, or sooner?
Again, it depends on when the road is built. I imagine that this subdivision will be registered in phases. When that phase is built, then that would form a condition and would have to be put in place before the city accepts the roadway.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you for the answers.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Bruni. So I don't have anybody else on the list here. Councilor Dufour, I saw you could signal. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I was just wanted to confirm with Mr. McConnell that the park allocation was the full 5%. I just seem to remember reading some communication that it may have been 3% plus cash in lieu of parkland.
Mr. Mayor, it's been a while, but if memory serves me correctly, it was 5%, but that they were going to use that the land was 5%, but they were going to use part of the land for a stormwater management pond. And at the time when that is developed, there will be discussions. There may be some cash in lieu as well, given that it would be at that point a combination of parkland and cash rather than simply parkland. But that was to be determined at the time of development, I think, because there's no detailed design for that at this time.
Okay, understood. So that answers the follow-up question of how much that amount would be. We just can't determine that right now. Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell.
Okay, so do I have any more questions for either staff or the applicant? I'm seeing none. I'm going to go back again and just determine whether or not anybody is on our call that is registered and wants to speak against the application. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody to your knowledge that is registered? That wants to do it. Okay, so Janice, you did just go off mute. Did you want to just introduce yourself and make your representations?
Yes, I'm sorry I missed mute the last time I found out how to do it. I've been on Foxborough now for about 6 years and very pleased with the area. My main concern has been really answered in all the questions. Traffic was one of the big things, and the green space. And I'm sure, I don't know if there's any other people from Foxborough that are on this call, or this Zoom, but I'm sure that they're much relieved with the answers we received today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janice. I appreciate your comments. And Madam Clerk, that to my knowledge is the only party then we had registered to speak tonight.
That's the only party we had registered who actually did join the meeting.
Okay, very good. Okay, Council, that brings us to the conclusion of the matter. So we can call a vote, but I believe the motion has to be read. Madam Clerk? Go ahead.
I have a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian, resolved that the report of the senior planner dated March 29, 2021 concerning A521ZOP and 57T21502 be received, and that Council approve the application in the following manner. 1, that Council approve Official Plan Amendment 231 by way of a notwithstanding clause to Policy H06 to waive the requirement that at least 30% of all dwelling units be affordable. 2, that Council rezone 163 Foxborough Trail by amending Special Exception 306 in the following manner. 1, that in Block 2, single detached dwellings be added as a permitted use in addition to the uses permitted in the R4 zone. Number 2, that Clause 5, which requires the resulting lots and buildings on Block 1 to be oriented in a manner such that rear yards are adjacent to 817 third line east, be repealed. And thirdly, that City Council approves an amended draft plan of subdivision by replacing the draft plan dated June 17, 2011 with the amended draft plan dated February 12, 2021, subject to the conditions to the draft approval attached as Appendix A, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaws to effect the same.
Okay, Council, the vote is loading on eScribe. Let's just call it all in favor. Any opposed? I see none. Congratulations, Mr. Bisucci. We wish you well with your development. And we know you will work with staff to make sure that we continue to work together.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you, staff, for an excellent report. Appreciate it. Appreciate everyone's cooperation. Thank you.
It was nice seeing you tonight, Mr. Bortoluzzi. It's been a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That brings us back to consent. Councilor Bruni, I think I was at you. Am I correct in my recollection?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. What item?
Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 6.20, the Black Road ditching. I guess to Carl, if Carl is on, I'm not sure. But would this help out the new subdivision that Mr. Bisucci tonight has come forward with? Does it have to? Yeah.
Do we have Mr. Rumio on, or is it there? We're going to Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott, Councilor Bruni's asking about the ditching report in relation to Mr. Bisucci's the Foxborough subdivision.
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, no, Mr. Bisucci's the drainage from that subdivision goes elsewhere. This is just a localized drainage issue that we have on Black Road.
Okay. Okay. Is that it on 6:20, Councilor Bruni?
One more on agenda.
Does anybody else have anything on 6:20? Okay, go ahead, Councilor Bruni.
Okay, agenda item 6.12 to Mr. Vare. Regarding this $50,000, wouldn't it be better if we just, I mean, I know social services will take the lead, but they might as well take the lead financially because they have more opportunities to apply for grant money than say for our city staff. I'm just asking Mr. Vare, do you think we should just be passing this directly to them? And not provide the $50,000?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. This is a program that the provincial government offers, and it's something that the city is able to take advantage of. Well, obviously, we're subcontracting to the DSAB to operate the service, but leveraging the investment from the city, which we do have in the budget, allows us to access these funds and provide the services to the residents. So that is why we're continuing to recommend the investment into this program.
Okay, fair enough. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else in 6.12? Anybody else with any other consent agenda matters? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, we could have the motion on consent and we can move to 6.19.
I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that all items listed under date March 29, 2021, agenda item 6, consent agenda, save and accept agenda item 6.19, be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Motion's carried. That brings
And I
us
would
to
just point out that 6.19, there's not a resolution for it because there's a bylaw on the agenda. So I have also accepted that bylaw from the consent portion under bylaws.
Very good. Councillor Christian, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I read over the report and I have a few questions and I'm not quite sure who to direct these to. I'm assuming it's Mr. Ver. You can correct me if I'm wrong, so I'll ask my first question. Mr. Ver, through you to Mr. Ver, Mr. Mayor, it says in the report that over 4 years, more than 10 businesses were assisted, and it caught my eye. Given the relatively low number, can you give us an exact number of how many businesses were assisted?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the number, the 10 was really related to the clients that have had lease agreements within the Millworks facility. And so there's many more businesses that are serviced as part of the programming that's offered through the Millworks. That stat was really related to those businesses that have had lease agreements with the incubator facility.
Okay, thank you. To that point, this facility, is it essentially a classroom / computer research type of environment? Can you describe the environment itself?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the Millworks facility has a number of smaller offices that can be leased out to businesses, as well as open desk space. So businesses can also rent out a desk space within a common open area. And then there's also a meeting room, or a couple of meeting rooms and one large boardroom that are available to the tenants in the facility.
Okay, so you're talking about leasing. How much money has been generated in terms of lease dollars over the last 4 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Previously, the EDC operated the Millworks facility, and they were entering into the agreements with the tenants that were part of the Millworks Entrepreneurship Center. In general, rough numbers, I believe the revenue was approximately $30,000 a year for the various revenue streams associated with the Entrepreneurship Center. So that would leave a net cost of approximately $40,000. Keeping in mind that the facility was opened in 2016, so it was new. And obviously there were some significant impacts this past year as it relates to COVID.
Okay. Do we have any idea of the businesses that have been assisted that are currently still operating as a result of our assistance?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, there's been a number of businesses that have been through the Millworks Center, and some of them being IT type businesses. CX Solutions was there. There were different consulting type businesses that started there, web firms that were in there that then graduated and moved out into the community. I would also point out that at the current time, the Innovation Center does not have an incubator facility that's in operation in the community. So this is the one incubator / co-working space that we have in the community right now.
Okay. Just a couple more questions, and I don't know if I should direct this to Mr. Ver or perhaps our CFO, but how many tax dollars have been generated through the efforts of the innovation or the incubator?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't have that information at this time.
Okay, thank you. And one final question, and then I have a comment. Have we made any efforts to find any other lease arrangements for space to operate the incubator?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, staff did do some preliminary research looking at other rental rates and lease rates in the community, just to get a feel for the market and the opportunities there. I would say a couple of things from a infrastructure perspective. Obviously, there's been some investment made, and the EDC previously received some funding to outfit the Millworks Center. And the current space is providing a good home, or has provided a good home over the past 3 years. So that's why staff are comfortable with recommending extending this for another term.
I guess I have a follow-up. Is there any available space in the Civic Center?
Through you, Mr.
Operation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, there is some limited office space available in different areas in the Civic Center. However, given this type of environment, the service we're providing for the tenants, which are the business startups and the co-working space, we felt that this location provided a nice spot for business incubation services and co-working services in the community, and would be an attractive environment for these startup companies.
Thank you for your patience in answering my questions. I just want to make a brief comment. You're asking for $250,000, if my math is correct, for the next 3 years. And I, for one, understand and appreciate the importance of having an operation like this. But in reading this report, it reminds me and brings me back to the days of the EDC and the conversations that I used to have with the former CEO there. And I just think that the report needs to be somewhat more robust in terms of measurable results. When you're asking for $250,000, I think council will support such an ask, but I think it's fair to ask staff to take this report back and provide more meaningful data in terms of the results and what some of our goals are going to be. It is a fairly significant ask, and I'll give the rest of council an opportunity to speak on this, but my feeling is that I'm going to ask for a deferral until we can get some more information on this, because otherwise this type of reporting is the same type of thing that we had from the EDC, and I found it, quite frankly, unsatisfactory. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I have a list going here. I'll have Councillor Guardian and Councillor Bruni.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Christian's questions were much along those that I was going to ask. A couple. I'm going to go back to in the report where it referenced the 10 successful businesses, I think over four years, was that the number 10 or just there over, Mr. Ver?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, that's correct. That's the number that was in the report.
Okay, how does that compare as a layman? Is that a good rate? I appreciate you mentioned COVID and there, that the tumult we had the last year or so. Can you kind of elaborate on that a bit?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, I think a couple things I would say. One is that it was the Millworks Entrepreneurship Center was launched in 2016 and was previously under the operation of the EDC. At that time, the Innovation Center also operated a business incubator. So there were clients located in 2 different facilities in the community. And in the initial phases of the Millworks Center, they didn't service IT and software companies because the Innovation Center had one. So I think in that case, there was clientele split between the 2 facilities, whereas now there's one facility that will serve all in that kind of incubation type space. And so the other thing would be you would have tenants. It's not a huge space. So at sometimes during the Millworks operations, they had a number of companies in there. So they were in a stage where they couldn't add in more companies to the office environment. So I think with all that said, over that time period, with it just launching and with the dynamics we had, it's probably fair to say that those results for the facility were fair. And certainly going forward, what we want to see coming out of COVID is that we can take advantage of that facility, ensure that we make it a dynamic center and fill it up with tenants to keep the facility full and look to provide that type of support to entrepreneurs in the community.
Appreciate that. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it never really made much sense to me that we had 2 facilities, quite frankly, but I appreciate the explanation. It helps a bit. Councillor Christian touched on goals. Do we have some goals set out moving forward over the course of this, say, the next 12, 24, 36 months, and what we might see as a successful rate of moving businesses out of the incubation center and out into the community on their own?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Yes, the staff are working to finalize those the goals within the center, and typically with incubation type services, you have clients that enter those facilities. The goal is, no more than 3 years, and that it helps them get started in their operation, and then they can move out and take root in the community. And so that, is part of the goal with these facilities is have the startup companies enter for a short period of time till they get up and running, stabilized, and then have them move out as they expand to take office space elsewhere in the community.
And this is my last question, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Ver. In terms of the kind of niche, in terms of whatever type of business is looking to be launched, are there parameters there that the incubation center focuses in on more than others, or has expertise in more than others?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Yes, typically, we're looking for businesses that have the opportunity to scale in operations, businesses that offer a unique solution that can be taken to the marketplace, and we see opportunity for, exponential growth. So we're not looking for lifestyle businesses or businesses that, have a goal just to maintain 1 or 2 jobs. We're looking for businesses that have, a goal to grow and have the opportunity to grow. Within the Small Business Enterprise Center network, so these are networks of, they call them SBECs across Ontario. Certainly, we are able to tap into expertise across the province and as well through the innovation network. So if a company comes in to Sioux Ste. Marie that has a specific niche sector that they're targeting, we are able to tap into expertise across the province to help provide them with guidance and expertise to grow their business here in Sault Ste. Marie.
Great. Thanks for the answers, Mr. Ver. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we got Councilor Bruni next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to Mr. Ver regarding how many people would be at the millworks at one time, businesses? Like how many businesses would be there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor.
On average.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni. In terms of the office space, I'm just trying to get the exact number for you here. I'll have to follow up with you with the exact number of offices. It's not a huge space that we've got there, but I'll have to follow up with you to get the exact numbers.
Okay, and just a comment, I know Councillor Christian brought it up regarding, do we have available space at the City Hall Civic Center? And I know Mr. Ver gave his reasoning why, but I think it's one option to look at, especially if the office, it's not occupied at 100% capacity. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. And I'll wait for Mr. Ver's reply.
Okay, so I've got Councilor Vezolan next.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ver. And I do agree with Councillor Christian that we do need more information, especially in terms of, is this going to be an incubation space or is it going to be a co-working space, which are very two distinctively different business models. So, and just to kind of explain to the greater public, an incubation space means that companies are there to grow and to get supports. Correct, Mr. Ver?
That is correct, yes.
So of the 10 companies, I think the one takeaway that have been successful, I think we need to have, so there were 10 companies that were successful in the incubator and have left the incubator. How many started since 2016? Was it 15? Was it 22? Was it 50? And of those 10 companies, how many of them are still have their headquarters in Sault Ste. Marie? And how many people are locally employed by those 10 companies? I think that would be really important from a return of investment perspective, because that's what we want. We want people living here, working here, growing businesses here. And while we certainly understand that there's a global market and that we also want to support, I think that's a key piece, because this is an investment in that regard. When you take a look at the dollars and cents with this 5,000 square feet at Millworks and the staff to support it. The other key piece is if you're developing a co-working space, that's a whole other different kettle of fish. And I think about, the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. I think of 180 John Street in Toronto. I've worked at Galvanize, Impact Hub, where it's distinctive office spaces where you have smaller companies that maybe it's one person or two people, and you have dedicated offices with the boardroom and the funky kitchen and all of that kind of stuff. That's, I think, a whole other model. And what I would recommend is, first you need to determine what is the business model that you're creating here, because it's two very distinctive things, especially in terms of staffing and equipment and support. So Mr. Ver, at this point, I'm up for deferral, and I think we need to actually create a business plan moving forward and not just continuing what was going on, because that may not make sense.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezowalan, I will confirm that we do have two options there for clients. We do have the incubation type service where people can rent an office, but we do also offer hot desk service as well, similar to a co-working space where people can rent a desk. I did pull up the information related to the facility. So there are 7 offices within the incubation and co-working environment, and 8 desks that we have available right now within the facility.
I have used your hot desks in the past before, but I think there needs to be better parameters around what this space is going to be and what it's going to really look like. And it is one of those very modern spaces that had a lot of renovations done to it. So I'm not against that. I'm sort of like, we have to take a look at what is the business model and what is the return of the rent dollars, and also the staffing dollars that we're putting into it. Because if it's just a co-working space, you need limited staff, if any, really. They're pretty self-sufficient. So if it's an incubator, and if you have people there that are business advisors, then that's a whole other model. So that's where I want to see the definition and the deliverables of these 10 companies in terms of the data of who's still here and how many people they're employing.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor Bezuel. I have Councillor Nero left in the list. And before we get to Councillor Nero, Mr. Vera, just for our information, I think it's in the report. When does the current lease expire?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the current lease actually expires at the end of March, so 2 days time. And we were looking to have it renewed starting April 1st. Yeah, okay, so I just want to make everybody sensitive to that fact. Are there any holdover provisions in the current lease? Like, is there a risk of losing the space if the lease, you don't get the approval to renew the lease tonight? To you, Mr. Mayor, we would have to, I think the easiest way we've discussed with legal is working with the EDC to extend their previous lease with the owner of the facility.
Okay. Okay, so Councillor Nero, your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Might not be worth these questions after those last comments because we have 2 days to finalize this. But Mr. Mayor, have we looked at other spaces? I know councilors asked about space at City Hall. Have we looked elsewhere and compared the rates of this agreement compared to, let's say, space downtown?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero, yes, staff did do some research and investigate, typical lease rates and other facilities in the downtown core and what was available. And, they were comfortable with the facility we have now, the rate we have, which and what it includes in that rate, and to make the recommendation to continue with the space.
So we don't know if they were competitive or not. It was just that staff was happy with the way things are right now.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Nero. No, the rates were competitive. We confirmed the rates were competitive with what else was out there on the market.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. I too, along with the other councilors who have spoken, I think we should take a better look at this. You brought up the issue of, I guess, time is of the essence. Can we really stop and defer this? I would like to. I'm not sure of the ramifications of it right now. But I think we really need to, going forward, if this goes forward, continues to go forward, we need a report, I think, at least yearly on the success rate of this incubator. I think just the information that we have to date, I just don't think it's enough. So those are my comments.
Okay, so we have 2 more people on the list right now, Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Shoemaker, and then we'll talk about how we deal with this matter tonight. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through your worship to Mr. Vera. I clarify, I believe Sioux College has incubator currently for their new graduates or something like that. Do you know?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'm not aware that they have an incubation space. They do have the new facility that was built out, but I don't believe they offer incubation services to companies.
Okay. May I suggest that you reach out to Sioux College, because it's my understanding that they have recently. And may I suggest you reach out to Goma University, because both of these wonderful institutions have business programs where they're trying to encourage entrepreneurship. And if I may also suggest partnerships in this community are still valuable, especially with our educational institutes like Goma University, Sioux College. I agree with my other council people that we may want to defer if we can. That may give you more time to work on a partnership with these fine institutes that believe in promoting entrepreneurship, promoting business, and promoting students staying in Sault Ste. Marie, and any other people that want to enhance their business knowledge, students or even current business individuals. So that's all at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so I have Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate all the questions my fellow councillors have asked. My comment is actually somewhat unrelated to the direction most of them were going in, but the fact that this is being brought to us with a renewal date of April 1st. So I would ask staff that if there is future renewals of leases that are going to be brought to us, that they be brought to us at least one meeting in advance of when they're going to expire, so that we have time to deal with issues like this as they arise. I do not feel comfortable with the fact that we're now working with a 3-day time frame and council wants more information.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Shoemaker. I appreciate those comments. It doesn't, Councillor Christian's mentioned a deferral here, and I'm going to go to the CEO here because I don't think it's simply a deferral. When you defer something, you move it to a different date to decide on it, but you're actually asking for more information here and a more substantial report to come back to you, at which point you will decide. So I just want to see how the CEO is taking that. Not to presume that that's what's going to happen on a vote, but I've now, by my count, had at least 5 city councillors say they have interest in more information or deciding this at another meeting. So 2 things, Mr. CEO. From your perspective, do you need a deferral motion to take this back and put some substance that you're hearing from the table around it? And I'd like some feedback for council on the consequences of that. Because my sense is that I think we all agree that we need to support this ecosystem and this type of space and have this type of space. This space was started by the EDC in 2016. To Councillor Gardy's point, there were 2 incubators for a long period of time. That's because there were 2 separate organizations running them. I can tell you that the city had meetings with those organizations at that time and asked to just have 1 incubator so that we weren't duplicating those services and have 2 agencies competing with one another. One of the reasons why we took this in-house was for this kind of accountability, and that in the end all of us felt that we were responsible for it, but we were never having these discussions and making these decisions. That's where we are now. So I don't want to see us make a decision that has an adverse effect on our ability to have this space. So Mr. CEO and maybe Mr. Ver, if you need to defer to him, from your perspective, do you see this as a deferral, or would you require a deferral motion to take it away? And number 2 is what's the risk of not being able to renew if that's ultimately what the council wants to do?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To your first question, what type of motion would it be? It would be a referral motion. You would be referring the matter back to staff for further review and report back to council. So should council wish to move that motion, that would be fine, and staff would respond to that. As to the risks of doing that, I'll ask Mr. Ver to speak on this in a second, but my view would be that the current landlord, I think, would be accepting of us trying to work out some sort of short-term extension of the existing EDC agreement, given the fact that the matter will be looked at and quite possibly council may make a decision after having the further information of continuing a 3-year agreement with that landlord. Mr. Ver, I'll turn it to you to ask for your comments on that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think we would be in that boat, and it would just be a matter of coordinating with our EDC, the existing corporation, to see if they were willing to extend that lease and work out transfer of payment funds to facilitate that.
I'll also point out, Mr. Mayor and Council, Councillor Shoemaker's comments on the timeline are not lost on staff. I would just point out that having the EDC operations under our roof, as well as tourism, does lend itself to things popping up that maybe we weren't aware of. Another aspect of that is the number of EDC staff that have gone on to other positions, and we have been filling those positions, but it does mean some gaps in institutional knowledge that's gone out the door, and we have to have some time to fill that again.
So this then isn't a lease renewal. It's the city entering into a lease with the landlord as of April 1st, because the lease that the landlord currently has with the EDC is expiring at the end of this month. So
that's correct. So we would, as Mr. Veers pointed out, we would need to work with the EDC and the landlord to see if we could extend their lease.
Yeah, and that would take cooperation from, in lieu of provisions in the lease which allowed the tenant to extend it, it would take cooperations from both parties to extend it. So I just want to point out to council tonight that there is, and I'll leave it to council to make whatever decision it sees fit to make, but there is potential risk in referring the matter beyond the lease date, because you would, I don't know what the lease with the EDC says, but in any event, you can't be sure that the space will be available come April 1st. So, Councillor Christian, I said I'd come back to you. Did you want to move a motion to refer the matter back to staff?
Yeah, I just, my gut is telling me that we need to refer this. The whole point behind taking this stuff in-house was in large part these issues that we're talking about tonight. So I think if we're going to follow this through, we need to send this back to staff. I think we need to get a hold of the parties and see if something can be worked out quickly. But I'm going to move for a referral.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
So we have Councillor Hollingsworth. Okay, so Councillor Christian spoke in favor of the referral. Do you have anybody that's willing to or wants to speak in opposition to the referral? Councillor Shoemaker?
I'm not sure if I'm actually opposed to it so much as I think from a risk perspective, it probably makes more sense to simply negotiate a 1-year lease at this point, so that we can be assured that we don't lose the space. And in the interim, staff would have the time, certainly plenty of time in the 12-month period to come back to us with the type of information we're looking for. So I don't know that that's necessarily an opposition point so much as perhaps an amending motion.
That's not amending the referral. That would be amending the current authority on the main motion that staff is seeking to enter into a 3-year lease. So Councillor Christian's asking us to refer it back to staff. He's got a seconder. They've indicated why. Councillor Gardy, you had your hand up.
I just think on a go forward basis, we're going to need a space like this. I don't know if I could ask a question of Mr. White in regards to space at the Civic Center over the course of the next handful of years, maybe not necessarily now, but is it something that we could hold, we could locate here eventually? Could you see that happening?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Gardy, we'd have to review that to see what our future needs are going to be. So yes, we do have some spaces available in parts of the building, but we would really have to assess if we're looking at a medium or long-term future.
Thanks. As I see it, Mr. Mayor, we need this space. you know, as Mr. Ver indicated, the rate that we're paying is competitive with others available in the community that are similar. And, you know, the whole thing about bringing EDC in was this accountability piece. I think moving forward, that's what we're striving for, is more accountability, regardless of where it's situated, especially if it's going to cost in and around the same price. So I don't know that it's necessary to send it back to a referral at this time. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you. Mr. Ver, has there not been, I'm getting my corporate strategic plans and some other things, like just a bit, I'm not remembering exactly. Has there not been reporting on the goals around the EDC and the intentions and what happened previously within the last, I don't know, maybe 6 months or earlier this year? Or can you remind us, or is this as some councillors are concerned about, like, there's really no information about what the objectives were and what's been accomplished?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, in the past, the EDC has brought their annual reports to council, which outlined the activities that took place in the Millwork Centre. And then, you know, prior to the move in-house, they set out their annual business plan, which would include the objectives and metrics for that space. And certainly going forward, staff will be working on providing those metrics and updates to council. I think from our perspective, you know, looking at the incubation landscape in the community, you know, we know this is the sole facility now for this in the community. We have staff that are working at that site that are part of the funding received from the province of Ontario for small business enterprise centers. So the staff that are there are actually in part paid for by the funding agreement we have with the province of Ontario. And, you know, we felt it was an opportunity to continue that, and we'll refine it and adjust it as we move forward. We have in our plan that we brought to council in April, the economic development strategy and the COVID recovery strategy focused on the sectors for growth, which were technology, which included advanced manufacturing, IT, and energy sector. Also, we talked about education and tourism, but within that, we also talked about setting the foundation in the community. And part of that foundation was having an entrepreneurial ecosystem that supported new entrepreneurs in the community. To Councillor Hollingsworth's point, we are working with Sioux College and Algoma University. We are collaborating with their faculty, particularly as it relates to the business program and entrepreneurship, and looking to increase that. So rounding back to your question, I think previously reports were provided, and certainly we'll do that going forward. And having an entrepreneurship facility and entity is something that we saw as a key part of advancing the economy here.
Thank you.
Okay, council, we're going to vote on the referral. I'm going to add my 2 cents in here before we do. I appreciate all the points that Councillor Christian's raised, and I think it's important for us to recognizing that staff is transitioning into this, but also for staff to recognize the kind of accountability that council is going to expect on a going forward base on, you know, the economic development file and the city's management of it. And, you know, when a lease comes due, the due diligence that we would expect that we go through and we see when we're making a decision to release. I'm sensitive to the expense of the place, of the space, but I think I'm more sensitive to the potential of losing the space in our assessment of it. I agree that the timing isn't ideal, and that it would have been, you know, preferable that this matter would have got to us earlier than it did. But it's here now, and the current lease with the EDC expires. And, you know, I trust staff's assessment that on an interim basis, this is the most appropriate course of action, and I'll support it in that respect. But we have Councillor Christian's motion to refer this back to staff, seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth, so we'll call a vote on that now. All in favor of the referral, please raise your hands. 6 Opposed to the referral? So the matter is referred back to staff. It's 6 in favor of the referral, 5 opposed to the referral. For my records, opposed myself, Councillor Shoemaker, Councillor Gardy, Councillor Dufour, and Councillor Vezo-Allen. Was I correct about that, Councillor Vezo-Allen? Or you were in favor of it? Yeah, you were in favor of it. Okay. Councillor Hilsinger, were you opposed to it? That's right. I apologize. I missed you on my screen. So those opposed, the remainder of council was in favor of it. So the matter is determined. It's referred back to staff. So that brings us to 8.1, Madam Clerk. You're on mute.
Under agenda item 8.1, I have a motion by councillors Vezo-Allen and Dufour, whereas COVID-19 has affected many businesses both locally and globally, and whereas the restaurant and hospitality industry has been plagued by restrictions during this pandemic, and whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie Planning Division in 2020 streamlined the process for patios, particularly in our downtown area. And whereas a Restaurants Canada survey estimated that 1 in 10 restaurants may have to close permanently. And whereas the job losses in that same survey are estimated to be 300,000 Ontario-wide. And whereas municipal patio fees were waived for 2020, now therefore be it resolved that municipal patio fees and fees for patio use of parking spaces continue to be waived for the 2021 season, and that planning continue to streamline the patio process as it is safer for our community to be outdoors, and we want to encourage our community to support our restaurants safely.
Okay, we'll start with you, Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Very brief, Mayor, thank you very much. I think this just makes sense. The hospitality and restaurant sector has been probably hit the hardest in terms of the pandemic. Sault Ste. Marie was never much of a patio place, but I think we saw last year just how great patios are and people really embracing them and partaking in them. I think this is a safer way for us to go to restaurants, being outdoors. And this certainly also ties into what Mr. McConnell brought forth in 6.18 with the parking requirements. So I'm hopeful that my colleagues see the same and that we give the restaurants a break. It's not a ton of money, but I think at this point for restaurant owners, every little bit counts, and we really want to support and promote the patio culture in our community, and I'm proud to put this forward.
Okay, so do we have any other comments on this motion? I think we can all get behind it. We did it last year. It makes a lot of sense to do it this year. All in favor? Okay. Madam Clerk, that brings us to 8.2.
Item 8.2 is a motion by councillors Gardy and Scott. Whereas the Government of Ontario is planning to increase reliance on gas-fired electricity generation from Ontario's gas-fired power plants, which is anticipated to increase greenhouse gas pollution by more than 300% by 2025 and by more than 400% by 2040. And whereas Canada's temperature is rising more than double the rate of the rest of the world, which is in alignment with climate models and projections impacting northern climates most significantly. And whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie participated in Northern Climate Change Network led by the Climate Risk Institute, which worked with 5 Northern Ontario municipalities to advance their climate change adaptation planning and risk assessment efforts. And whereas the CRI presented the City with Sault Ste. Marie Community Climate Change Risk Assessment Report, which was completed in February 2020. A variety of climate risks emerged as a high priority, in particular those associated with infrastructure damage. That is road washouts, loss of utility services, and flooding. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie City Council has approved a plan to get the municipality's greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And whereas the province of Ontario will adversely impact more than a third of the greenhouse gas reductions it achieved by phasing out its dirty coal-fired power plants due to a power plant built around ramping up gas-fired generation to replace the output of the Pickering Nuclear Station scheduled to close in 2024. And whereas alternative options are available to reversing short-sighted cuts to energy efficiency programs and stop underinvesting in this quick-to-deploy and low-cost resource, which include maximizing our energy efficiency efforts by paying up to the same price per kilowatt hour for energy efficiency measures as we are currently paying for power from nuclear plants, for example, up to 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And whereas the province of Ontario should continue to support renewable energy projects that have costs that are below what we are paying for nuclear power and work with communities to make the most of these economic opportunities. And whereas the province of Ontario has alternative options to increase gas-fired electricity generation, such as the province of Quebec's offer to receive low-cost 24/7 power from its water-powered reservoir system as a possible alternative. Now therefore be it resolved that Mayor Provenzano, on behalf of City Council and the City of Sault Ste. Marie, requests the Government of Ontario to place an interim cap of 2.5 megatons per year on our gas plant and greenhouse gas pollution, and develop and implement a plan to phase out all gas-fired electricity generation by 2030 to ensure that Ontario meets its climate targets, and that a copy of this resolution be sent to the Premier of Ontario and to Ross Romano, MPP for Sault Ste. Marie.
Councillor Gardy.
Yeah, that was a mouthful, Mr. Mayor. I won't keep you much longer. I just think it's important that Ontario does all it can to reach its climate targets, and a significant part of that, as the motion reads, is the province placing an interim cap on of 2.5 megatons per year on our gas plant and greenhouse gas pollution, and implementing a plan to phase out a gas-fired electricity generation by 2030. And I'm hopeful that we'll get the support. Councillor Scott and I appreciate his support. And we'll add Sault Ste. Marie's name to the growing list of municipalities calling for just this, including Guelph, Kitchener, Toronto, Mississauga, Kingston, and many more. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any other comments on this motion? Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, I actually have a question. I think it would probably go to Councillor Gardy. I want to be clear. We're asking that the government reduce or phase out its use of gas to generate electricity, but we're not necessarily asking that they phase out gas for home heating, for example. Are we? This motion doesn't go that far, does it?
Motion speaks to electricity, gas-fired electricity generation by 2030.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? See none, all in favor? Very good.
And under agenda item 8.3, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Hilsinger, whereas COVID-19 has caused formerly routine activities to require fundamental changes, and whereas voting has historically been done by congregating in enclosed spaces, locations which is known to present a significant risk of spreading COVID-19, and whereas elections that have taken place during the pandemic have seen a high percentage of voter turnout, including in the British Columbia provincial election in 2020, in the United States presidential election in 2020, and whereas other elections held during the pandemic have been fraught by delays due to rising COVID case numbers, such as the 2021 Newfoundland and Labrador provincial election. And whereas though vaccines are set to be administered to all Canadians who want them in 2020, it is unknown if the coronavirus will reoccur seasonally or if it will be eradicated by vaccines. And whereas it is prudent for the City of Sault Ste. Marie to properly plan for foreseeable challenges to its electoral process, now therefore be it resolved that the City Clerk's Department be requested to investigate and report to Council on options for the City of Sault Ste. Marie to mail ballots to all registered voters in the city for the 2022 municipal election, and determine the safest method to have those ballots returned to the city, both with regard to the health and safety of the community and the security of the ballot.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just noticed that I've got the year 2020 in there when vaccines will be administered to all Canadians. Obviously, that should say 2021. So perhaps we can friendly amendment that just in the agenda. The report, I think, fits or the request fits nicely with the report that was brought forward by our Deputy City Clerk today on exploring ways to increase voter turnout for the next election. The election's quite some time away, but I think that allows us to do a proper investigation of the safest way for voting in next year's municipal election. What's allowed by the province obviously will be a big factor in what the city of Sault Ste. Marie can implement. However, I think that we just don't know enough about the vaccines at this point, whether or not they're going to be a seasonal vaccine like the flu shot, or whether or not one dose will keep us healthy for quite some time. So it's prudent to prepare as if this will be an issue next fall, and see what we can do to make sure that any restrictions on congregating do not affect our turnout in next fall's election, and hope we can get some good information when this report comes back. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Shoemaker. Any other comments or questions on this resolution? I see none. All in favor? Resolution's carried.
And that will bring us to agenda item 11, bylaws. I have a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Hollingsworth. Resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda, save and except bylaw 2021-62, under date March 29, 2021, be approved.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
And a motion to go into closed session by Councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth. Resolved that this council moves into closed session to discuss 2 items concerning the acquisition of land, 2 items concerning the disposition of land, and 1 item subject to solicitor-client privilege. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matters without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Motion carried.
And a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Motion carried.